The first sound wasn't her scream. It was the splash. Cold water hit her face as she gasped, hands trembling against the rough edge of the trough. Her torn dress clung to her back, stained with dirt and blood. The sun above the Texas plains burned mercilessly. Flies circled her wounds like they already knew she was too weak to fight. Elias McRae stood behind her. 52, skin tanned like old leather, his shirt soaked with sweat and guilt. He wasn't her father, he wasn't her husband, but somehow she had ended up on his land, half dead, barely breathing, and no one in town wanted to know how or why. "Hold on," he said quietly. She tried. Her arms shook. Her lips were blue. The water in the trough rippled as her breath faltered. She had been found at sunrise by the fence line, beaten, barefoot, left for dead. Some said she was a runaway. Others whispered she was cursed. But when Elias lifted her from the dust, something inside him broke. He had seen dying cattle, starving men, and burned houses, yet never had he seen eyes that empty. He poured water over her shoulders, washing the blood away. The sound of it was soft, almost tender, and for the first time that morning, she moved. Her fingers gripped the wood tighter, refusing to let go. It was as if her body was begging the earth not to forget her. The ranch was silent except for the wind. No one came to help. No one dared. Elias looked at the horizon, at the long road that led back to the town of Mobeetie. He knew the men who did this, men with boots polished by fear. Not dust, men who laughed when women screamed. He clenched his jaw, knowing that if she lived, they would come again. The girl tried to speak. Her voice was a whisper. "Why me?" He didn't answer. Not yet. He dipped a cloth into the water and pressed it to her face. She winced, but didn't pull away. Her eyes met his, full of terror and something else. A question. She was 25, maybe a stranger with no name anyone cared to remember. But Elias saw something different beneath the bruises, beneath the dirt. Something that refused to die. The sun climbed higher, painting the plains gold. Her breathing steadied. The water turned red 3 times a day. That's how often he would clean her wounds before the fever broke. Before she spoke her name again. Before history itself would change because of what one rancher decided to do with a broken woman and a wooden trough. But right now, she was still shaking, still trapped between life and death, still wondering if kindness was just another trick. Elias watched her closely, his hands steady, his heart not. And as the wind howled across the open land, one question hung heavy in the air. Was he saving her life, or was he saving his own soul? The sun had already burned half the sky when Elias carried her inside. The small cabin smelled of cedar smoke and horse sweat. He laid her down on the cot near the window where the light fell soft and warm. She was barely awake, whispering words he couldn't catch. Maybe a prayer, maybe a name. He poured a tin cup of water. Holding it close to her lips, she flinched at first, then drank like someone who hadn't tasted mercy in years. He watched the dirt wash off her face, one drop at a time. The bruises looked worse in the daylight, but at least she was breathing. 3 times a day, that's what he told himself. But on the 4th day, he forgot the midday meal. Clara sat by the window, holding her stomach and staring at the endless field. When he came running back with a steaming bowl, his hand burned as the soup spilled. "I'm sorry," he said, out of breath. She smiled for the first time. "It's all right," she whispered. "You remembered twice. That's already more than anyone ever did. Morning to clean her wounds, afternoon to feed her, night to keep the fever from stealing her away." He wasn't a doctor, just a rancher with rough hands and a quiet house. But something about this girl made him careful, made him gentle in a way he hadn't been since his wife passed. Every time he touched her skin, he did it like the world might break if he pressed too hard. Outside, the wind rattled the barn door. The horses stomped, uneasy. Coyotes had been circling the hills again. Maybe they smelled blood, maybe they smelled guilt. Elias didn't care. He only cared that she opened her eyes again. When she finally did, it startled him. They were green, soft but sharp, like the color of spring after a long drought. "You're safe here," he said. Her voice cracked. Safe never lasts. He didn't argue. He just nodded and handed her another cup of water. Later that afternoon, he made her soup from cornmeal and salt pork. It wasn't much, but when she tasted it, her shoulders loosened just a little. That was the first time she looked at him without fear, just tired eyes, searching for a reason to trust. By the second night, she was strong enough to sit up. The fever was fading, but the silence between them grew heavy. He worked at the table, mending a bridle strap, pretending not to notice when she watched him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. He paused. "Because someone should have." She didn't speak after that. She just stared at the fire, as if the flames could explain what his words meant. When the wind howled outside, he added another log. The room glowed golden, soft, alive. She pulled the blanket tighter. Closing her eyes for the first real sleep in days, Elias sat back, listening to her breathing steady like a slow song. He thought it was over for the night. But then she whispered one more thing, half dream, half warning. "They'll come for me when the moon turns full." Elias froze. His hand stopped on the table. He looked at her pale face in the firelight. And for the first time, he wondered who exactly she was and what kind of men were coming to take her back. Weeks went by before she could walk steady. Her voice grew stronger, but the fear in her eyes stayed the same. By the third morning, the fever had broken, but the fear had not. She woke before sunrise, sitting by the window with the blanket around her shoulders, staring at the open land. Elias poured her coffee, black and strong, the way he always drank it. She took a sip, winced, then smiled a little. It was the first smile he'd seen since she came. "You said they'd come for you," he reminded her. "Who are they?" She didn't look at him. Men from Mobeetie, the kind that don't take no for an answer. Elias's jaw tightened. He'd known men like that all his life, the kind that wore Sunday suits to church and blood on their boots the rest of the week. By noon, he saddled his horse. "Stay inside. Lock the door." She grabbed his sleeve, weak but determined. "You'll get yourself killed." He looked her in the eyes. "Maybe, but I won't let them take you." The ride to town was long, dusty, and quiet. Every mile felt heavier. The streets of Mobeetie were waking up when he arrived. Men lined the saloon porch, spitting tobacco, watching him like crows on a fence. He found the sheriff near the feed store. "Morning, Elias," the man said cautiously. "Heard you took in a stranger." "She's not a stray dog," Elias answered flatly. "She's hurt." The sheriff sighed. "You should have left her be. Her name's Clara. Belonged to a cattle broker named Rourke. He paid good money for her." Elias's voice dropped cold. "You don't pay for people." The town went still. Every head turned, and even the wind stopped to listen. Rourke himself stepped out of the saloon, wiping whiskey from his beard. "Well now, looks like the old rancher grew a spine." Elias didn't reach for his gun. He just stared him down. "You beat a woman and call it business. You come near my land again and you'll find out what real work feels like." Rourke laughed and spat near his boots, but the hand holding his glass trembled. Later that night, he sent 2 new men from Sweetwater. He doubled the pay and told them, "Make it look like an accident." Rourke laughed, that ugly kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl. "You think you can stand between me and what's mine?" Elias took a slow step forward. "She's not yours. Not anymore." The crowd whispered. No one dared move. Even Rourke's smile faded. Somewhere in the distance, a thunderclap rolled across the plains, though the sky was clear. When Elias turned his horse to leave, the sheriff called out, "You just started something you can't finish." He didn't look back. "Then I guess I better make it worth finishing." That night, as the sun bled into the horizon, Clara waited on the porch, eyes wide with worry. When she saw him returning, her breath finally eased. He looked tired, older somehow, but unbroken. "They know now," he said simply. She whispered, "What did you do?" He glanced at her, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. "I told the truth, and in a town built on silence, and that was enough to make enemies. Now, if you've been following this far, take a sip of your tea, lean back a little, and tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. And if you want to see how this story unfolds, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens when the men from Mobeetie come knocking at midnight." That night the wind shifted. It came crawling down from the canyon, dry and mean, carrying the kind of silence that makes dogs hide under porches. Elias felt it first. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the open land. Clara was still awake, sitting by the fire. Her hands gripped the edge of the blanket. "They're coming, aren't they?" she whispered. He nodded. Rourke doesn't take humiliation kindly. He had moved her bed to the cellar that afternoon, just in case. Now he poured oil into the lanterns and checked every lock. The moon hung low, fat and orange, lighting the ranch like a stage. Every sound was sharp. The creak of wood, the groan of a horse, even his own heartbeat, out near the fence. 3 shadows broke from the dark. Men on horseback, no headlights, no voices, just the steady thud of hooves on dry dirt. Elias took a slow breath. He wasn't young anymore, but he'd been in his share of fights. He didn't need speed he just needed patience. He waited until they reached the corral. Then the first lantern flared. One of the men cursed. "He's here," Elias fired once, not to kill, just to scare. A second shot followed from the barn, sharper, cleaner. It came from old Jake, the ranch hand who had worked beside Elias for 20 years. Nobody ever saw him leave that barn again, and nobody ever dared to ask. The shot split the air like thunder. Horses reared. One rider fell, screaming. The others ducked behind the fence. Inside the cabin, Clara crouched near the stairs, her eyes wide. She could hear his voice outside. Calm as stone. "You picked the wrong night." "Boys," they fired back. Splinters flying off the porch rail. Elias moved like he'd rehearsed this his whole life. Each time they reloaded. He shifted position, drawing them closer to the barn where he'd laid his trap. A spark caught, then a roar. Flames shot up from the haystack, lighting the night bright as noon. The men panicked, blinded by the fire. Elias lunged forward, knocking one to the ground. The others fled, one dragging the wounded man by the arm. When it was over, the ranch was quiet again, except for the crackle of fire and Clara's footsteps on the porch. When dawn came, the sheriff knocked on the door, face hard as stone. "Barn fire was an accident, right?" he asked. Elias nodded slow. Clara hid behind the curtain, clutching a paring knife tight enough to turn her knuckles white. She ran to him, eyes full of fear and relief. His shirt was torn, his knuckles raw, but he was still standing. "You could have died," she said. He wiped the sweat from his brow. "Not tonight." She stared at the burning barn, then back at him. What will they do now? He looked toward the hills where the men had disappeared. His voice was steady, but low. "They'll come back, but next time. I won't be alone." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He gave a tired half smile, looking at her like he'd already decided something she didn't yet understand. And as the firelight danced in her eyes, Elias said softly, "Tomorrow, we ride to Palo Duro. There's something I need you to see." Now that sounds simple, doesn't it? But what he showed her the next morning would change both their lives forever. You won't believe what waited for them in that canyon. The sun rose slow over Palo Duro Canyon, painting the cliffs in gold and fire. Elias rode ahead, Clara behind him, wrapped in his old coat. The wind smelled like sage and dust and something new. Hope, maybe. They stopped near a ridge where the land opened wide like a promise. Below them the river shone bright, winding through the red stone like a silver ribbon. Elias dismounted first, then helped her down. His hands were rough, steady, and kind. "This place," he said quietly, "saved me once. Maybe it'll save you too." For a moment she didn't speak. She just stood there, eyes glistening, staring at the endless land. "Why here? Because out here," he said, "no one owns another soul. The earth doesn't care who you were, only who you decide to be." She walked closer to the edge, her hair catching sunlight. Every breath she took seemed to wash more of the past away. All the bruises, all the shame, and all the names they'd called her, gone piece by piece, like dust carried off by the wind. That summer, they stayed in the canyon. 3 times a day, just like before. Morning, she helped him tend the horses. Noon, they shared simple meals by the water. Evening, they talked. Sometimes Clara would ask about old Jake, but Elias just looked toward the distant hills and said quietly, "He's watching the ranch from somewhere higher now." Sometimes not at all. Just sat by the fire, listening to the world breathe. He never asked her to stay. She never asked him why he cared. Maybe some things don't need explaining. Maybe healing doesn't come with words, only with time. One night, under the stars, she said softly, I thought I was broken. Elias poked the fire and smiled. Maybe you were, but broken things still shine if you hold them up to the light. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that makes you believe in life again. When fall came, they built a small cabin by the river. Not much, just 4 walls and a roof that leaked when it rained, but it was theirs. No debts, no fear, just peace. Years later, folks would say that little ranch became a refuge, a place where no woman was turned away, no hungry soul was ever told to leave. Some said that what Elias and Clara did changed that valley forever. Maybe it did. Maybe kindness really can echo that far. So if you've been listening this far, maybe ask yourself, when was the last time you offered someone a bit of kindness, not because they earned it, but because you could? And maybe ask too, if you were Elias, would you have stopped that day by the fence, or would you have kept riding? If this story touched you, take a second to click like. It helps more than you know. And if you want to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe. And remember, healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers 3 times a day.